This is Alex Mercer. 30 days have passed since the rain began, and with that passage of time, something fundamental has quietly vanished from daily life. The expectation of dryness. Not sunshine. People stopped hoping for that weeks ago, but dry ground. The kind of dryness that once existed beneath shoes, beneath foundations, beneath the assumption that land, if left alone long enough, would recover. It no longer does. Even during the briefest lulls, when the rain thins to a mist or pauses for minutes at a time, the ground does not exhale. Water remains locked into the soil, saturating every layer down to depths rarely reached outside of floodplains. Pavement never fully loses its sheen. Grass bends permanently under its own weight. Fields that once absorbed rainfall now repel it, turning into shallow mirrors that reflect a sky no one remembers clearly anymore. Farmers stop using the word mud because mud implies transition, wet becoming dry again. This is something else. Engineers, hydrologists, and soil scientists begin using a new term in briefings: permanent saturation. Not as a forecast, but as a condition. The implications of this realization ripple outward slowly, because nothing dramatic announces it. There is no single moment when someone declares the land lost. Instead, it becomes evident through patterns. Drainage systems that once recovered overnight now remain full indefinitely. Small depressions in roads collect water and never empty. Footprints linger for days. Cemeteries report graves taking on water. Tree roots, deprived of oxygen, begin to fail invisibly before leaves ever yellow. The ground has crossed a threshold, one that historical models cannot describe because history has no equivalent. Experts stop pulling out comparison charts. They stop referencing past storms, past floods, past anomalies. There is nothing left to compare this to. The rain has not created an emergency. It has rewritten baseline reality. As the land loses its ability to recover, the built world begins to respond in ways that are subtle, technical, and deeply unsettling. Structural fatigue does not announce itself with noise. It whispers. Buildings do not collapse. They complain. Wood framing swells as it absorbs moisture. It was never designed to hold indefinitely. Doors stick, then refuse to close. Window frames distort just enough to let more moisture in, accelerating the cycle. Metal fasteners corrode beneath paint and insulation, unseen until they weaken connections that once felt permanent. Concrete, often assumed to be impervious, reveals its vulnerability slowly. Water infiltrates microscopic pores, carrying salts and contaminants inward. Freeze-thaw cycles are no longer required to fracture it. Pressure from constant saturation is enough. Engineers begin to detect internal cracking, damage that does not show on the surface but compromises strength from within. Across cities and towns, inspection notices multiply. Not evacuation orders, not emergency alerts. Advisories, recommendations, assessments. The language is careful, almost gentle, because officials understand the psychological weight of escalation. But the message is unmistakable to those who read between the lines. Time is now a structural enemy. Roofs sag not from storms, but from months of absorbed weight. Foundations wick water upward, spreading dampness through basements and lower floors. Electrical systems short more frequently as moisture finds paths once sealed. Mold appears not in neglected spaces, but in occupied ones. Classrooms, offices, apartments where people are still trying to live normal lives beneath abnormal conditions. What makes this phase uniquely dangerous is its invisibility. People are conditioned to respond to impact, to noise, to collapse, to obvious damage. But this is degradation without spectacle. A staircase feels slightly softer underfoot. A wall sounds different when tapped. A building that stood firm for generations now exists in a state of slow negotiation with physics. Insurance assessors struggle to classify the damage. Is it flood-related, weather-related, structural aging? The rain blurs categories that once mattered, and with them, responsibility. Repairs are attempted, but materials arrive already damp. Nothing cures properly. Paint peels within days. Sealants fail. Fixes become temporary by default. Communities begin to adjust their behavior in response to these quiet failures. Upper floors are favored over basements. Heavy equipment is relocated. Storage moves upward. People learn to listen to their buildings the way sailors listen to ships. Creaks, shifts, subtle changes that indicate stress. Engineers hold town meetings explaining load tolerances and moisture limits to audiences who never expected to need such knowledge. Schools shorten hours in older buildings. Offices rotate occupancy to reduce stress on compromised structures. The rain has not forced abandonment, but it has demanded caution, vigilance, and constant reassessment. Psychologically, this stage is perhaps more exhausting than earlier ones. There is no drama to rally against, no single event to mark as the worst. Instead, there is the steady erosion of trust in land, in shelter, in the idea that things left alone will hold. People begin to feel that even stillness is unsafe. Rest becomes difficult when the environment itself feels unstable, not because it is moving, but because it is slowly yielding. The rain, by refusing to escalate, has denied people the clarity of crisis. It has replaced it with endurance. And yet, life continues within these constraints. People adapt again. They learn which buildings breathe better, which materials resist longer, which routines minimize risk. Knowledge spreads laterally, neighbor to neighbor, faster than official guidance can keep up. The rain has forced an education not just in survival, but in systems, how land supports structures, how moisture migrates, how time itself can become destructive when conditions never reset. The world has not broken, it has softened. And softness, over long enough periods, changes everything. This is Alex Mercer. 1 month without dry ground has revealed a truth that disasters often obscure. Not all failures are sudden, and not all dangers announce themselves. Some arrive quietly, settle in, and wait. This is Alex Mercer. For generations, water scarcity meant absence. Dry taps, empty reservoirs, cracked earth. But after weeks of unbroken rain, scarcity takes on a far stranger form. Water is everywhere. Overflowing reservoirs, swollen rivers, saturated ground. And yet, trust in it begins to collapse. Fresh water does not disappear. It becomes questionable. Treatment plants designed for cycles of intake and rest now operate under constant pressure. There is no pause in inflow, no window to stabilize chemical balances or flush systems fully. Runoff from roads, industrial zones, landfills, and agricultural fields pours continuously into collection points, carrying with it oils, heavy metals, fertilizers, and waste. Each additional day of rain increases dilution, but also contamination. a complex chemical equation that shifts faster than protocols were written to handle. Reservoirs reach capacity not with clean accumulation, but with layered uncertainty. Surface water, once filtered naturally through soil and time, now arrives directly, bypassing those slow protective barriers. Operators monitor turbidity levels that never fall back into safe margins. Filters clog faster. Chemicals are consumed faster. Maintenance crews rotate continuously, yet still fall behind. In rural areas, the change is more abrupt. Wells that once drew from deep, protected aquifers begin pulling in surface water through saturated soil pathways. What was once separated by layers of earth is now connected by persistence. Families accustomed to drinking from their own land notice subtle changes: taste, smell, cloudiness. Advisories spread, then expand. Boil notices become routine. Trust erodes not because of a single failure, but because consistency vanishes. The paradox unsettles people deeply. They are surrounded by water, listening to it fall, watching it pool, stepping through it daily. Yet they hesitate before drinking a glass from the tap. Bottled water distribution expands rapidly, not as an emergency response, but as a normalization. Pallets appear in grocery stores, schools, municipal buildings. Limits are posted quietly. Logistics managers speak in terms once reserved for drought response, even as rain continues to fall outside loading bays. The language feels inverted. Abundance has become risk, and the psychological impact of that inversion lingers. People begin to measure safety not by presence, but by certainty, something the rain has stripped away. As trust in water wavers, movement itself begins to falter. Transportation does not collapse dramatically. It degrades. Rail lines laid with precise tolerances warp subtly as the ground beneath them remains soft for too long. Tracks shift by millimeters, enough to reduce speed, enough to require inspection after inspection. Trains slow, then reroute, then stop entirely on some lines. Roads remain passable, but unreliable. Subsurface erosion creates voids beneath asphalt that looks intact until it suddenly isn't. Sections are closed not because they are underwater, but because engineers can no longer guarantee what lies beneath them. Detours multiply. Travel times double, then triple. What once took an hour now takes a morning. Air travel becomes conditional. Visibility fluctuates. Runways remain wet, limiting braking efficiency. Ground crews work continuously in rain that never ends. Fatigue setting in as safety margins narrow. Flights are delayed not for storms, but for saturation, for systems that need dryness to function as designed. Cargo operations slow, then stack up. Perishable goods spoil not because of heat, but because of delay. Supply chains, optimized for precision and speed, strain under unpredictability. Inventory models fail. Just-in-time delivery becomes just-in-case storage, but storage space is already compromised by moisture. People adjust their lives accordingly. Commutes are planned around contingencies. Alternate routes become primary routes until they, too, degrade. Public transit runs reduced schedules, not from lack of demand, but from infrastructure fatigue. Deliveries arrive late or not at all, and gradually, expectations shift. Communities become more localized by necessity. Mobility, once assumed, becomes negotiated daily. The rain has not trapped people in place, but it has made movement uncertain enough to change behavior. Plans are made tentatively. Travel is minimized. reliability becomes more valuable than speed. What ties water and transportation together in this phase is not failure, but overload. Systems designed with margins are now operating without relief. There is no reset cycle, no dry interval to recover integrity or confidence. Each day builds upon the last, compounding wear, uncertainty, and caution. The rain has revealed how deeply modern life depends not just on resources, but on predictability. When that predictability dissolves, abundance can feel as threatening as absence. This is Alex Mercer. Surrounded by water and slowed by it, society enters a new negotiation with its environment. One where safety is no longer about extremes, but about endurance. This is Alex Mercer. The danger, once measured in flooded streets and unstable ground, quietly crosses a threshold and moves indoors. Mold, long considered a maintenance issue or a seasonal nuisance, becomes something else entirely. A public health crisis unfolding room by room, building by building. Hospitals begin reporting an uptick in respiratory complaints that defy normal seasonal patterns. Asthma attacks increase. Chronic coughs linger. Sinus infections resist treatment. Patients describe a heaviness in their chest, an irritation that never fully clears. At first, these cases appear unconnected. Then patterns emerge. Entire neighborhoods report similar symptoms. Schools notice absenteeism climbing steadily. What links them is not proximity to floodwater, but prolonged exposure to moisture trapped where it cannot escape. Homes that appear intact betray their occupants quietly. Behind drywall, moisture accumulates in insulation. Inside ceilings, condensation never fully dissipates. Ventilation systems designed to cycle air under normal humidity become conduits for spores. Mold spreads invisibly, threading through walls and ductwork faster than remediation crews can contain it. By the time discoloration appears on surfaces, colonies have often already established themselves deep within structures. Remediation teams are overwhelmed. Supplies run short. Waiting lists grow. Advisories shift tone, from prevention to mitigation, from cleaning to containment. In some cases, evacuation is recommended not because buildings are collapsing, but because breathing inside them has become unsafe. Schools close individual classrooms first, then entire wings. Eventually, whole buildings are shuttered. Temporary learning spaces are established where possible, but even these must be monitored constantly. Public buildings, libraries, municipal offices, community centers face similar challenges. Filters clog. Dehumidifiers run continuously and still fail to keep up. Electricity consumption rises, compounding strain on already stressed power systems. The rain has found a way inside not through doors or windows, but through time itself, through the sheer duration of dampness that no structure was designed to endure. Public health messaging adapts rapidly. The focus expands beyond rain gear and flooded roads to ventilation, air quality, and indoor exposure. Citizens are advised to keep windows cracked despite the rain, to run fans even when air feels heavy, to monitor humidity as carefully as temperature. Masks, once associated with pollution or illness, return as protective barriers against spores. The threat feels intimate. It is no longer about where you travel, but where you sleep. The enemy is no longer visible outside. It is suspended in the air, settling quietly into lungs. As physical spaces deteriorate, something less tangible begins to unravel as well. Time itself starts to lose its shape. Without sunlight to mark mornings and evenings, days begin to blur together. Dawn arrives without color. Dusk passes unnoticed. Clocks continue to tick. Calendars still advance, but the internal sense of progression fractures. People report waking unsure of what day it is. Work weeks stretch indistinctly. Weekends lose their contrast. Without variation in light or weather, memory compresses. Events that happened yesterday feel distant. Weeks ago feels like recently. Recently feels undefined. Sleep cycles deteriorate across populations. Circadian rhythms, anchored for millennia to the rise and fall of the sun, falter under constant gray. Insomnia rises. Oversleeping becomes common. Dreams bleed into waking hours. Fatigue accumulates not from exertion, but from disorientation. The rain becomes the metronome of existence, steady, unchanging, marking time without meaning. Its sound fills the silence that would normally be broken by birds, wind, or passing light. For some, it becomes background noise. For others, it becomes oppressive, a reminder that nothing is shifting, nothing is resolving. Psychologists note a rise in dissociative symptoms. People describe feeling detached from their surroundings, as if life is happening slightly out of sync. Motivation declines. Decision-making slows. Without clear temporal markers, planning becomes difficult. The future feels abstract. The present feels endless. Even emotions flatten, stretched thin by repetition. The rain does not provoke panic. It erodes clarity. And erosion, as with land and infrastructure, is more dangerous when it goes unnoticed. Communities attempt to create artificial rhythms. Lights are scheduled to mimic sunrise and sunset. Public spaces adjust hours deliberately to reintroduce structure. Schools and workplaces enforce routines not for productivity, but for psychological anchoring. Social gatherings are encouraged indoors, under controlled lighting, to maintain a sense of shared time. These efforts help, but only partially. The underlying dissonance remains. Humans evolved under changing skies. Constancy, especially of this kind, was never part of the design. What makes this phase particularly unsettling is its subtlety. There is no single moment when mold becomes a crisis, no announcement when time officially loses coherence. These shifts creep forward quietly, revealed only through accumulation of symptoms, of fatigue, of confusion. The rain has moved beyond infrastructure and agriculture. It now occupies biology and perception. It reshapes not just how people live, but how they experience living. This is Alex Mercer. As the rain continues, the challenge is no longer merely survival. It is orientation, to breathe safely, to sleep soundly, to remember what day it is and why that matters. The rain has not stopped, but now it is inside the walls and inside the mind. This is Alex Mercer. Economic collapse is often imagined as a moment, numbers dropping sharply, markets crashing, headlines flashing red. But what unfolds here is quieter, slower, and in many ways more destabilizing. There is no single day when the economy fails. There is only a gradual withdrawal. Businesses do not shut their doors with finality. They shorten hours. They cancel expansions. They pause projects that were once considered inevitable. Construction cranes remain in place but unmoving, silhouetted against gray skies like frozen punctuation marks in an unfinished sentence. The economy does not fall. It softens, sags, and adapts itself downward. At first, the changes are subtle enough to dismiss. A restaurant closes earlier until conditions improve. A manufacturing plant reduces shifts temporarily. Retail stores limit inventory because deliveries are unreliable. These decisions are framed as caution, not crisis. But as weeks pass and the rain does not relent, caution becomes policy. Hiring freezes spread quietly across sectors. Contract work evaporates. Overtime disappears. Paychecks shrink not through cuts but through absence. Fewer hours, fewer opportunities, fewer margins for recovery. For workers, the uncertainty is worse than termination. There is no clear break, no definitive end to plan around. Only waiting. Construction, once a visible engine of economic confidence, slows dramatically. Ground conditions remain unstable. Materials arrive late or damaged by moisture. Insurance underwriters reassess risk continuously, raising premiums or withdrawing coverage altogether. Projects approved on paper cannot move forward in reality. Foundations cannot be poured. Steel cannot be stored safely outdoors. Even indoor work is compromised by humidity and mold concerns. What remains are skeletons of development, half-finished buildings, fenced lots, paused ambitions. The landscape begins to reflect economic hesitation physically, not through decay, but through incompletion. Insurance becomes both a lifeline and a bottleneck. Claims rise steadily. Property damage, business interruption, health-related costs, but processing slows as adjusters are overwhelmed and risk models fail to account for duration. Policies written for storms do not translate cleanly to permanence. Coverage disputes multiply. Payments are delayed. Some claims remain unresolved, not because they are denied, but because no one can agree on how to define an ongoing disaster. For small businesses operating on narrow margins, delay is as damaging as denial. Cash flow tightens. Savings are consumed. Decisions once made confidently are now deferred indefinitely. Investment hesitates in ways that are difficult to quantify but easy to feel. Capital does not flee dramatically. It simply waits. Investors hold positions rather than expanding them. New ventures struggle to secure funding not because they are unviable, but because the environment is unknowable. Risk assessment depends on predictability, and predictability has dissolved into constant gray. Growth forecasts are revised downward, then revised again. Long-term planning becomes speculative. 5-year plans shrink to 6-month contingencies. The future becomes something to monitor, not to build toward. Supply chains adapt unevenly. Some sectors stabilize by rerouting logistics, localizing production, or stockpiling inventory. Others cannot. Perishable goods suffer. Specialized manufacturing reliant on precise conditions falters. Tourism contracts sharply, not due to fear, but fatigue. Travelers choose certainty over novelty. Conferences cancel. Events postpone. Hospitality shifts from expansion to survival. The ripple effects spread outward, touching industries that seem unrelated on the surface. When movement slows, spending follows. When spending hesitates, confidence erodes. For consumers, the shift manifests as restraint. People spend less not because they lack money, but because they lack clarity. Large purchases are delayed. Home improvements are abandoned. Vehicles are repaired rather than replaced. Savings, once earmarked for growth, are redirected toward resilience. The economy becomes defensive. Maintenance replaces expansion. Preservation replaces ambition. This collective behavior reinforces contraction without requiring any central failure. No one is panicking. Everyone is adjusting. Government response struggles to match the pace of decline. Stimulus frameworks are designed for shocks, not plateaus. Relief programs activate and expire while conditions remain unchanged. Metrics fail to capture lived reality. Official reports may show modest contraction, but they cannot measure erosion of confidence or the psychological weight of indefinite uncertainty. Policymakers speak of recovery timelines that assume resolution. The rain makes such assumptions increasingly fragile. What makes this contraction particularly insidious is its invisibility. There are no dramatic closures, no mass layoffs announced all at once. Instead, there is thinning, reduced hours, fewer services, longer waits, empty storefronts that are not abandoned, just dormant. The economy reshapes itself around caution, lowering its center of gravity to survive prolonged instability. It becomes smaller, slower, and more localized, not by design, but by necessity. This is Alex Mercer. In this phase, the economy does not collapse under pressure. It retreats, and retreat, when prolonged, leaves its own scars, less visible than destruction, but just as enduring. This is Alex Mercer. Population shifts are often marked by moments. Evacuation orders, border closures, packed highways. What happens here is quieter. There are no sirens, no announcements, no deadlines. And yet, movement begins. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, people start to leave. Not in waves, but in absences. A rental sits vacant longer than usual. A neighbor's lights stay off at night. A classroom has fewer desks filled. The change is subtle enough to overlook, until it isn't. Those who go rarely frame their decision as departure. They say they are visiting family, trying something new, taking a break until things improve. The language is careful, almost apologetic. No one wants to admit they are fleeing something without a name. There is no single threat to point to, only accumulation. Wet walls, lingering coughs, missed workdays, unreliable roads, a sense that life has narrowed. Leaving becomes a form of self-preservation that does not require justification. Housing markets register the shift before headlines do. Short-term rentals empty first, then long-term leases quietly expire. Landlords lower prices, then stop advertising altogether. Sales slow, not because demand collapses, but because uncertainty makes commitment feel dangerous. Buyers hesitate to invest in permanence where conditions refuse to stabilize. For those who stay, choice becomes constrained. For those who leave, options feel temporarily expanded. The imbalance grows. Schools feel the change acutely. Enrollment drops by single digits at first, easy to attribute to demographics, timing, chance. Then programs are cut. Classes merge. Temporary teachers are not renewed. Children notice friends disappearing from class photos. There are no farewell parties, no last days, just empty seats. The continuity of community begins to fray, not from conflict, but from erosion. Fewer people means fewer services, which means more reasons to leave. The feedback loop tightens quietly. Businesses adapt in parallel. Reduced foot traffic leads to shorter hours. Shorter hours reduce convenience. Convenience loss pushes more people away. Each departure seems insignificant on its own. Together, they reshape towns from the edges inward. Cafes remain open but subdued. Main streets feel wider. Sound carries differently. What once felt dense now feels sparse. The rain amplifies this emptiness, filling spaces where voices used to be. Those who remain do not necessarily feel abandoned. Many are rooted by work, by family, by lack of alternatives. Others stay out of conviction, believing that endurance itself has value. But even among them, the awareness grows. Leaving is possible. That knowledge alone changes the psychological landscape. Home becomes conditional. Belonging feels negotiable. The idea of permanence weakens. There is no census that captures this phase accurately. Movement occurs below thresholds. It does not register as crisis. It registers as drift. Authorities struggle to respond because there is nothing to respond to. No event. No spike. Just thinning. And thinning over time transforms regions more effectively than catastrophe ever could. This is Alex Mercer. Migration has begun, not with urgency, but with fatigue. And in its quiet way, it may prove one of the most lasting consequences of a rain that never announces itself, yet never leaves. This is Alex Mercer. For weeks, science spoke with confidence, measured, technical, reassuring. Models ran, forecasts extended. Probabilities were offered in careful percentages. But gradually, something shifts. Not in the data itself, but in how it is discussed. Meteorologists begin choosing words more cautiously. Climatologists pause longer before answering. Atmospheric physicists stop pointing to timelines and start pointing to limitations. The language of certainty gives way to the language of honesty. Briefings change tone. Early on, experts described the rain as unusual but explainable. A stalled system, a rare pattern, an outlier that would resolve itself with time. Now, the vocabulary tightens. Anomaly becomes permanent. Unprecedented stops meaning rare and starts meaning without reference. Charts still appear on screens, but they no longer point forward with confidence. Forecast horizons shrink. Weeks become days. Days become hours. Eventually, even those are hedged with conditions and caveats. The models still run, but they no longer lead. They react. Behind the scenes, the shift is even more pronounced. Researchers compare notes across institutions and borders, searching for analogs that do not exist. Historical records fail to provide guidance. Climate archives offer patterns, but none that persist without transition. The rain does not escalate into a known extreme. It does not collapse into normalcy. It simply continues, defying categorization. Scientists are trained to describe systems, to predict behavior, to reduce uncertainty. Here, certainty expands faster than explanation. Press conferences grow shorter, not because there is less to say, but because there is less to promise. Experts avoid definitive statements not out of fear, but accuracy. The most unsettling sentences are the simplest. We don't know. We're monitoring. There is no clear end date. These words land heavily because they mirror what people already feel. The gap between professional authority and lived experience narrows. Science does not fail, but it reveals its boundaries. The public reaction is complex. Some find relief in honesty. Others feel abandoned by it. Confidence, even when false, can be comforting. Uncertainty demands endurance. Without a projected end, people cannot plan psychologically. Events remain postponed rather than canceled. Decisions stay suspended. Hope becomes cautious, conditional, fragile. The rain continues not just as weather, but as a test of patience and trust. Within scientific communities, this moment is quietly historic. Admitting uncertainty is not weakness, it is integrity. Yet doing so publicly carries weight. It redefines the role of expertise from navigator to witness. Scientists shift from forecasting outcomes to documenting conditions in real time. The focus moves to impact assessment, adaptation modeling, and scenario planning rather than resolution. The question changes from when will it stop to how do we live if it doesn't? There is also a deeper philosophical reckoning underway. Humanity has grown accustomed to prediction, to believing that with enough data, enough computing power, enough refinement, the future can be outlined. This rain challenges that assumption. It is not chaotic, it is consistent, and that consistency, paradoxically, makes it harder to explain. Nature is not misbehaving, it is simply operating outside expectation. This is Alex Mercer. In this phase, science does not offer answers. It offers clarity of limits. And sometimes, the most honest forecast is not a date, but an acknowledgement. We are inside something we do not yet understand. This is Alex Mercer. After 30 days of unbroken rain, the landscape of sound itself begins to shift, not outside, but within the human mind. At first, each drop against rooftops, each whisper of water along gutters, felt oppressive. It dominated perception, demanding attention, reminding inhabitants of its relentless presence. Streets, homes, and fields echoed with the persistent rhythm, a soundtrack to exhaustion, worry, and adaptation. But the human brain is remarkable in its capacity to adjust, to normalize even the most extraordinary circumstances. And so, without warning, people stop hearing the rain. The sound does not vanish. The clouds continue to spill their moisture. Puddles swell imperceptibly. Roofs remain slick. Yet awareness of this constant accompaniment fades into subconscious acceptance. The mind reclassifies it from urgent signal to ambient environment, background noise that no longer triggers conscious concern. The rain, in effect, becomes part of the furniture of life, always there, always influencing, yet invisible in cognition. What was once a harbinger of inconvenience, fatigue, and threat becomes baseline, shaping days and nights without acknowledgement. This adaptation has paradoxical consequences. For many, silence becomes alarming. When rainfall lightens, even slightly, the absence of its familiar cadence generates unease. People strain to hear it. Anxiety rises. The rain, previously oppressive, had been predictable. Its constancy offered a form of structure, however oppressive. And the human mind prefers predictability, even if it is discomforting, to uncertainty. The shift demonstrates how deeply humans rely on environmental patterns to anchor perception of safety, time, and routine. In homes, offices, and shelters, conversations often reflect this subconscious recalibration. People remark on how quiet it is today, a subtle panic beneath their words. Children, who have known nothing but gray skies, may pause mid-play, uncertain how to interpret the softening drizzle. Adults adjust routines, unconsciously monitoring rain levels for cues they no longer notice. Pavement remains slick. Walls remain damp. Yet the sensory signal, the rain's voice, slips into a background hum, shaping life without notice. This is more than sensory adaptation. It is psychological endurance. In bedrooms, the human circadian system continues its struggle with the absence of sunlight. Yet the brain filters what it can. prioritizing survival and function. Habits emerge around rain. Laundry remains indoors. Errands are timed to minimal puddle accumulation. Waterlogged fields dictate agricultural cycles. Every adjustment acknowledges the rain's permanence, yet the mind treats it as unremarkable. In this way, persistence becomes invisible. Yet, beneath this quiet acceptance lies tension. The brain's recalibration does not erase fear, it buries it. Anxiety simmers beneath routine. The moment the pattern breaks, even minimally, attention spikes. Humans crave constancy, even when that constancy is harmful. The familiar becomes safer than the unknown. And so the rain teaches a lesson in endurance that is not dramatic, not violent, but profound. Survival is as much about internal adaptation as external action. Urban and rural landscapes alike reflect this new reality. Roads slick with continuous moisture are navigated without thought. Parks, rivers, and sidewalks absorb water as if it is part of the infrastructure itself. Buildings, fatigued from constant damp, are maintained with mechanical routine rather than active vigilance. Society continues, not through triumph over the rain, but through habituation to it. Silence, ironically, becomes more disturbing than noise. This is Alex Mercer. After a month of unyielding precipitation, the rain has shifted from adversary to background companion. It no longer demands attention because humans have learned to live with it, not by changing it, but by letting the mind adjust. Yet the fragility of this adaptation remains. The instant the rhythm falters, anxiety rises. Familiarity, even in adversity, feels safer than unpredictability. In this quiet recalibration, we discover a new dimension of endurance. The ability to survive not only in the world as it is, but in the way our own perception chooses to interpret it. Here, in the gray continuity, silence itself becomes the anomaly. This is Alex Mercer. In the early days of the relentless rain, insurance policies offered a semblance of security, a legal buffer against uncertainty. Flood coverage, storm clauses, even comprehensive homeowner policies created the illusion of predictability, a reassurance that no matter how persistent the weather, someone would bear the cost. But as the weeks stretched into a month, insurers began to adjust quietly, not with announcements or sweeping cancellations, but with subtler, cumulative changes that few noticed until it was too late. Policies reached expiration dates and were not renewed. Fine print grew longer, more specific, and harder to interpret. Flood clauses shrank. Terms once considered standard became conditional. Coverage that once seemed comprehensive now carried exceptions that applied to nearly every conceivable consequence of constant rainfall. Slowly, homeowners, farmers, and businesses realized that their supposed protection was eroding not because of dramatic events, but because the rain had itself become unquantifiable. It was no longer an anomaly, a discrete threat, or a record-breaking storm. It was a condition, a permanent state. And conditions, by their nature, cannot be priced. This shift rippled through communities quietly but decisively. Residents who had relied on insurance for mental and financial stability discovered that claims would no longer be honored or would be limited to narrowly defined circumstances. Waterlogged basements, weakened foundations, mold infestations, incidents once clearly covered, were suddenly contested, deemed maintenance issues rather than insurable losses. For some, the legal language was difficult to interpret. For others, It was impossible to navigate the bureaucracy of Fasfanov to preserve coverage. By the time the reality sank in, policies had expired, and protection that had seemed permanent was gone. Businesses, too, felt the change. Contractors, warehouses, and farms that had relied on insurance to stabilize risk budgets found themselves exposed. Deliveries delayed or damaged were no longer reimbursed. Equipment left outdoors became a liability rather than an asset. Even corporations with extensive risk management portfolios had to confront the same reality. When the environment itself defies historical data and precedent, traditional methods of risk assessment collapse. Models that had worked for decades became obsolete overnight. The psychological impact of this quiet withdrawal is profound. It is not the dramatic panic of a sudden disaster. It is the creeping anxiety of realizing that the systems designed to buffer against catastrophe no longer function. Homeowners walk through water-saturated basements with a gnawing awareness. This is theirs alone to manage. Farmers watch crops collapse in fields softened beyond recovery, knowing that compensation is no longer assured. Communities internalize the loss of external support, adjusting daily routines, behaviors, and expectations around the fact that exposure is now absolute. Even government agencies acknowledge the dilemma. Advisories shift from recommendations of risk management to guidance on self-reliance. Emergency funds and aid programs are stretched thin, and the narrative of protection becomes contingent, local, and personal. Individuals are forced to calculate loss not statistically, but experientially. The threat is no longer a possibility, it is a constant, and the only mitigation is vigilance, adaptation, and acceptance. This is Alex Mercer. The rain continues, uninterrupted, yet it is not the only force reshaping life. The withdrawal of insurance marks a turning point. The world has stopped being predictable. Protections that once framed daily existence are gone, replaced by a new reality in which exposure is permanent and responsibility is indivisible. In this quiet erosion, the fragile scaffolding of security disappears, leaving only the human capacity to endure, adapt, and survive in a world defined by conditions, not events. Here in the shadow of relentless precipitation, we learn a new truth. Not all protection is guaranteed, and resilience must increasingly come from within. The rain no longer simply falls on the land. It falls upon certainty itself, washing away the structures that made life feel safe. This is Alex Mercer, as the relentless rain stretches beyond a month. The sky has become an unbroken expanse of gray, a ceiling without edges, a lightless canopy that refuses to change. Sunlight, which once defined the rhythm of human life, has vanished from perception. Morning no longer rises with clarity. Afternoon no longer wanes with golden warmth. Even brief breaks in cloud cover fail to reach the ground. The sun is absent, not violently stolen, but quietly erased by the unyielding persistence of the atmosphere. Without its presence, the world loses more than illumination. It loses the framework upon which time, biology, and society are constructed. Cities respond, forcefully and systematically. Streetlights, once intended as nighttime aids, remain illuminated through the day. Their artificial glow casts long reflections across puddled asphalt, glistening sidewalks, and abandoned plazas, creating a perpetual synthetic twilight. Office buildings retrofit interiors with full-spectrum lighting that mimics the sun's spectral balance. Homes, too, undergo transformation. Lamps burn at noon, kitchen bulbs hum in tandem with living room fluorescence, and residential windows glow unnaturally. marking a day that exists only under electricity. Energy grids, already strained from continuous rainfall and environmental load, face a new demand. Constant lighting is no longer optional. It is existential. Without it, people lose orientation, function, and cohesion. The psychological ramifications are subtle but profound. Humans rely on light cues for more than vision. They are the markers of time itself. Days are measured by the sun's ascent and descent, the quality of illumination signaling work, rest, and sleep. Now, with artificial light filling the void, perception of time fractures. Sleep cycles collapse, circadian rhythms falter, and the distinction between night and day blurs into ambiguity. Offices hum through hours that once would have been night. Children awake under lamps meant to simulate morning. Streets remain occupied because humans can no longer trust the sky to define their activity. Artificial daylight becomes the framework not for comfort, but for survival, orientation, and sanity. Infrastructure adapts to sustain this new reality. Substations are reinforced. Backup generators are deployed preemptively. Electrical networks are carefully monitored to prevent catastrophic blackouts, because even brief darkness becomes disorienting, dangerous, and destabilizing. Hospitals, schools, and public buildings install redundant lighting systems. Transportation hubs, reliant on visibility for safety, operate under constant artificial illumination. Power becomes a lifeline, no longer a luxury. Its absence is a crisis, not of inconvenience, but of functionality, orientation, and human cognition. The social and cultural impacts of permanent lighting are equally striking. Streets never empty. Cafes, parks, and public spaces are occupied at all hours, as light dictates behavior rather than natural cycles. Leisure activities, once constrained by day or night, now unfold continuously. Children play under synthetic noon while outside. The sky remains a featureless gray. Work schedules, education routines, even religious practices adapt to this new constant, creating a society that is temporally unmoored. Time becomes internalized, measured by clocks, meals, and artificial light, rather than environmental cues. The interplay between biology, psychology, and technology is profound. Human bodies continue to crave natural light. Hormones fluctuate in response to environmental stimuli that no longer exist. Vitamin D deficiencies emerge. Mental fatigue rises. Circadian systems attempt to compensate, but with limited success. Artificial light, no matter how advanced, cannot replicate the subtle shifts in spectrum, intensity, and angle that the sun provides. People navigate a dual reality, physically illuminated, yet psychologically deprived. The mind recalibrates out of necessity, but the cost is cumulative, a quiet strain of existence layered beneath the hum of lamps, LEDs, and fluorescence. Communities respond collectively, not just individually. Governments, municipalities, and corporations coordinate to ensure lighting persists. Public spaces are upgraded. Emergency lighting codes are revised. Maintenance crews work around the clock to replace bulbs, repair wiring, and monitor grids. Failure is not measured in days, but in minutes. Even a brief power interruption now becomes an immediate threat to urban function and human orientation. The artificial sun has replaced the natural one, but it comes with dependency, fragility, and a relentless need for oversight. This is Alex Mercer. Permanent lighting represents more than a technical solution. It is a marker of adaptation, a testament to human ingenuity under relentless pressure, yet it is also a reminder of vulnerability. Society no longer follows natural rhythms. The sky no longer provides cues. Civilization, in effect, has imposed its own day, its own cycle, its own order, through wires, bulbs, and carefully monitored energy flows. Survival now depends not just on endurance in rain, but on the infrastructure that sustains the illusion of sun, the light that signals time, and the will to maintain continuity in a world that refuses to illuminate itself. In this new epoch, life persists not by the sun's grace, but by human engineering. Artificial daylight defines the rhythm of cities, the functioning of institutions, and the adaptation of human biology. Streets glow, offices burn with constant illumination, and the night becomes a concept rather than a reality. Electricity, labor, and planning replace natural light, and yet, through it all, humans endure, moving, working, and surviving under a world defined not by the sky, but by the brilliance we have forged ourselves, a sun we switch on, maintain, and rely upon as the clouds remain ever gray, unyielding, and eternal. This is Alex Mercer. As the rain stretches into weeks, then months, a new generation comes of age, children for whom gray skies, constant moisture, and puddled streets are not anomalies, but the framework of their reality. These children do not ask when the rain will end, because the concept of sunlight as a daily expectation is foreign to them. They do not question what adults describe as the sky above, because their sky has always been a continuous gray, unbroken, unmoving. For them, umbrellas are extensions of the body. Playgrounds are built with shelter in mind, and water is neither interruption nor danger. It is simply context. Where older generations see fatigue, anxiety, and oppression, these children see constancy and structure. Their understanding of the world is inseparable from the rain. The relentless downpour has become the canvas upon which they draw their lives. Playgrounds and public spaces have been redesigned entirely for this generation. Traditional swings and slides, once open to sun and wind, now sit beneath broad canopies. Play areas are constructed with waterproof materials, non-slip surfaces, and channels that drain constant water away from children's feet. Outdoor learning activities take place under covered decks, and field trips are carefully planned around shelter. Rain gear, boots, coats, ponchos, and umbrellas is not optional, it is essential. Children move seamlessly between indoor and outdoor spaces, fluidly navigating the constant damp. They understand intuitively that water is omnipresent, that streets are slick, and that soil is unstable. They play without fear because, to them, fear is not inherent in the environment. It is an abstract concept inherited from the adults who raised them. Schools reflect this adaptation on both practical and psychological levels. Recess is permanently indoors. Classrooms incorporate waterproof flooring, and architecture has shifted to account for moisture and light limitations. Lessons now integrate real-time environmental awareness. Children study the accumulation of runoff, monitor soil saturation, and learn to recognize early signs of structural compromise. Science projects often involve observing puddles, testing water quality, or studying mold growth, activities that for older generations might signal danger, but for these children are natural exercises in understanding their surroundings. Even art and literature begin to reflect the world they inhabit. Stories are told under dim, consistent light. Illustrations depict gray skies and wet streets. Creativity emerges not despite the rain, but because of it. Socially, these children develop behaviors, norms, and strategies that differ profoundly from adults' expectations. Games are designed for shelter. Schedules revolve around artificial lighting and safe passage over wet terrain, and interactions are conducted with constant awareness of the environment. They negotiate puddles, navigate wet stairways, and traverse slippery sidewalks without instruction or complaint. While adults may hesitate, fearing the consequences of wet surfaces and unstable ground, children adapt instinctively. Their resilience is embedded not in lessons of disaster preparedness, but in lived experience. They carry in their muscles, minds, and daily routines the patterns of survival that adults are still learning to sustain. Homes, too, evolve around the presence of water. Children no longer expect the sun to filter through windows. Artificial lighting is the norm, marking the passage of hours. Umbrellas and rain boots are treated as permanent household items. Laundry routines, indoor play, and chores are organized around moisture. Families design interiors with water-resistant flooring, ventilation systems that combat constant humidity, and spaces where children can be active without exposure to hazards. Even celebrations and social rituals adapt. Birthdays, holidays, and neighborhood gatherings all unfold beneath shelter, lit by artificial daylight and guided by the omnipresence of rain. For this generation, wetness is embedded in daily life, internalized as a natural, unremarkable feature of the world. Psychologically, this adaptation carries a weight that is invisible but pervasive. Adults who remember sunny days, warm afternoons, and blue skies feel an unease when observing children who never knew these luxuries. There is admiration, certainly, for the resilience and fluency with which these children navigate a world adults still find hostile. Yet there is also disquiet. The very normalcy they exhibit reminds adults that the world they once knew is fading, replaced by a new reality. Children do not measure the day by sun or moon. They measure it by movement, routine, and artificial light. They do not fear the rain. They expect it. Their comfort, shaped by necessity, highlights a truth too difficult for many adults to confront. The environment has fundamentally redefined itself, and the next generation is fully native to this transformed world. Cultural and educational systems evolve alongside these children. Curriculums increasingly focus on environmental literacy, disaster awareness, and adaptation. Stories, songs, and lessons embed the realities of constant rainfall, saturated ground, and artificial lighting as natural backdrops to life. Civic planning and urban design begin to reflect the needs of children for whom the sun is irrelevant. Covered pathways, resilient infrastructure, and public spaces engineered for water rather than against it. Public spaces, parks, and playgrounds become laboratories of adaptation, teaching lessons in mobility, safety, and social coordination that adults once took for granted. Even in their imagination, children conceive worlds defined by rain. They draw maps where puddles are rivers, sidewalks are streams, and indoor areas are safe havens. Their games incorporate weather as a constant companion. Their narratives revolve around navigating perpetual moisture. They understand, instinctively, that life is negotiated with water, not against it. Their play is not only entertainment, but rehearsal. Rehearsal for survival, for endurance, and for thriving in a world reshaped by circumstance. This is Alex Mercer. Children born during the relentless rain do not merely adapt, they redefine normal. They inhabit a world where umbrellas are extensions of self, indoor recess is perpetual, and artificial light is a proxy for the sun. They learn to live, grow, and play under conditions that older generations struggle to endure. And for the adults who observe them, there is both hope and unease. Hope in the resilience, ingenuity, and adaptability of the next generation. Unease in the recognition that the world they once knew has been fundamentally altered. These children will carry forward lessons that are no longer hypothetical, philosophies that are no longer abstract, and a conception of reality that will shape society for decades to come. In this new era, survival is not measured by weather that passes, but by the ability to integrate, adapt, and thrive within permanence. For the generation born to reign, the gray sky is not a crisis. It is home, classroom, and playground all at once. And through them, humanity glimpses the possibility of enduring, evolving, and defining normal on its own terms. This is Alex Mercer. The rain continues, the skies remain gray, and the world has changed in ways we are only beginning to understand. Yet life endures, adaptable, resilient, and persistent. Children grow, communities adjust, and even the land itself finds ways to endure. We do not know when the rain will end, or if it ever truly will. But we do know this: humanity listens, adapts, and survives. And in that quiet determination, there is hope.